What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Dunk on AP podcast. Today, we're going to be dunking on AP World, talking developments in Europe from 1200 to 1450. So, without any further ado, let's go dunk on AP. So, today, we're going to be talking Europe, and we're really going to be talking Europe after the Roman Empire, but particularly a few hundred years after the Roman Empire falls. So, remember that Christianity becomes the dominant religion in Europe when it's made the official religion by the Roman Empire around the year 300. But with the collapse of the Western Roman Empire in 476, Christianity really becomes like the one unifying force that binds the majority of people in Europe. So the fall of the Roman Empire leads to a decline in trade, intellectual life, and unity. This is often referred to as the medieval times or the Dark Ages in European history. The eastern half of the former Roman Empire survives as the Byzantine Empire until 1453, and they continued a lot of Roman traditions. There are a ton of Roman successor states that come afterward, but today we're going to talk about a few. So between the year 1000 and 1450, learning and trade begin to revive in Europe, and this era is called the High Middle Ages. European civilization is characterized by decentralization, though, in a system of land for loyalty known as feudalism. The manorial system, which featured large fiefs or estates, which were referred to as manors. So manors produced everything that people living on it required and provided economic self-sufficiency. This reduced the need for trade. Essentially, these are like small villages. So serfs were peasants that were tied to the land and were under the total control of their lords. The serfs were using something called the three-field system. This basically was a system in which crops were rotated through three fields. It's exactly what it sounds like. By this time, feudal lords, though, are going to start to get a little bit less powerful because of monarchies becoming more centralized. Great example of this is France. This was the first monarchy to develop a bureaucracy. The Estates General was a body that met to advise the king that included representatives from the clergy, nobility, and the commoners. The Holy Roman Empire, which is kind of a misleading name, it's not exactly what it sounds like. This was ruled by the German king Otto I. In the varying complex lands in Western and Central Europe that were ruled by the Holy Roman Empire. This was first a title held by Frankish and then German kings for 10 centuries. The Holy Roman Empire existed from 800 to 1806. And like I said, this is the land that is in Western and Central Europe at this time. Norman England, big one here. The Normans are descendants of Vikings who take over in around 1066, led by William the Conqueror. They presided over a tight feudal system that blended Normans and Anglo-Saxons and actually created modern English people. Now, in 1215, you get the Magna Carta. This was the first document to establish the king and government were not above the law, and it was intended to prevent the king from abusing his power. The Magna Carta also documents the rights of, quote, free men and established law as a power in itself. Now, another thing to remember, the first English Parliament is formed in 1265. It gives rights to the English nobility, but really not to the citizens. This is more to upper class people. You've got the 100 Years' War, which is between 1337 and right around 1454, in which the rival monarchies of England and France fight a series of battles known as the 100 Years' War. By the end, the English retain only a port in France. On each side, a monarch fosters a sense of unity on each side, and people begin referring to themselves as French and English rather than from a particular region. And this is like I mentioned earlier. What you're going to see here is the more centralization of monarchies and the real establishment of the countries as we know them today. Also, in the 100 Years' War, they are using gunpowder weapons, and hopefully that's dinging in your head going, oh man, transfer from China. Now, another thing to mention is that at this time, Muslims rule over Spain, and the Reconquista was the effort of over many centuries to reclaim Spain from Muslim control, starting in the 8th century and ending in 1492. Now, the Great Schism created the two largest denominations in Christianity, the Roman Catholic and the Eastern Orthodox faiths. Eastern and Western Europe disagree on doctrine, ritual, and church authority. By 1054, there is going to be a schism. Eastern or Greek Orthodox and Roman Catholic. And speaking of religious issues, the Crusades. So Pope Urban II calls for liberation of Jerusalem, the Holy Land, from Muslim control in 1095. The battle cry for this crusade becomes Deus Vult, or God wills it. In the First Crusade, this is the most effective from 1096 to 1099. Basically, from a European standpoint, Salah al-Din recaptures Jerusalem, though, for the Muslims in 1187, back from Christian control. There will be 5 official crusades and numerous unofficial crusades. The Fourth Crusades from 1202 to 1204, one actually sacks the city of Constantinople and other Christian cities. But the Muslims do that to the Christian cities. So, effects of the Crusades. They provided direct contact with Muslim ideologies and trade. So you're going to see these two cultures clash and build off of each other in pretty major ways. Arabic numerals, reintroduction of Aristotle, and paper production are going to come back into Christian societies. It's also going to cement the division between Romans and Eastern Orthodox Christians. It also is going to unify Muslims who have been infighting since their schism. And it's also going to bring wealth to merchants of Europe, and particularly Italy. Now, Europe is becoming more and more economically self-sufficient in these years, 1200 to 1450. Marco Polo is going to be an Italian native visiting the court of Kublai Khan in China and bringing back stories, and we learn a lot about China from these stories. So the bourgeoisie or the burghers are part of a growing non-church related middle class of shopkeepers, merchants, craftspeople, and small landholders. This is made possible by growing trade and exploration with the rest of the world. Women's roles are going to decline as societies become more urbanized. Some women work as artisans, but not all of them are going to have property rights. So with, again, the expansion of trade, the growth of an agricultural surplus, and the rise of a middle class to spend money on art, you are going to get Europe coming out of the middle, the dark ages here, into the Renaissance, a period characterized by a revival in interest in classical Greek and Roman literature, art, culture, and civic virtue. Formerly decayed or forgotten manuscripts are put into mass circulation by the new printing press, made or revolutionized by Johannes Gutenberg. You also see a little more reliance on something called humanism. This is going to be pushed during the Renaissance and focuses on individuals rather than God. It propels vernacular language. It centralizes governments and monarchies. So you've got the Renaissance in the South and you've got the Renaissance in the North. So the Southern Renaissance, in the regions of Italy and Spain, church patronage supports the Renaissance. For example, Dante Alighieri uses a religious framework for the Divine Comedy, a story which features hell, purgatory, and heaven. His fearlessness in criticizing corrupt religious officials and his willingness to use Italian vernacular instead of Latin reflects his independence from the Roman Catholic Church. Wealthy families such as the Medicis of Florence used their money to support painters, sculptors, and architects. Then you've got the Northern Renaissance. By 1400, the Renaissance spirit spreads to Northern Europe. While many Renaissance artists emphasized piety in their work, others emphasized human concerns. Geoffrey Chaucer was writing the Canterbury Tales in the late 1300s and showed kind of a microcosm of middle-class occupations in England, including several church positions. His satirical writings portrayed monks who loved hunting and overly sentimental nuns. Like Dante a century earlier, Chaucer chose a vernacular Middle English for his work, although many of his other writings were in Latin. This time, you're going to see a huge population growth in Europe, and in so many ways, we see the birth of modern Europe from 1200 to 1450. And really briefly, I do want to touch on the origins of Russia. So during the late Middle Ages in Eastern Europe, extensive trade in furs, fish, and grain actually connect people from Scandinavia to the Mediterranean to Central Asia. The city-state at the center of this trade was Kievan Rus, based in what is today Kiev, Ukraine. Because it adopted Orthodox Christianity, it maintained closer cultural relationships with Byzantium than Roman Catholic Europe. In the 13th century, the Mongols are going to overtake this region. We'll get to that. So it develops even more separately from the rest of Europe. And you see Russia as very distinct from the rest of Europe. Now, the Mongols are going to require local tribes to collect taxes for them. As these nobles grew wealthy in their role, they began to resist Mongol rule. In the late 15th century, under the leadership of a Moscow-based ruler known as Ivan the Great, the region became independent of the Mongols. This marked the beginning of the modern state of Russia.